The wind that crossed the canyon that evening had a certain weight to it, like breath held too long. It stirred the wheat-colored grasses and dusted the hills with whispers only the old remembered how to hear. Perched on the edge of that whispering world was Elijah Braddock, a man as weathered as the porch he sat on, the wood beneath him groaning just as much as his knees when he stood. He watched the sun melt into the rim of the horizon, paint bleeding from the sky in streaks of rust and ember. His cattle moved like shadows across the field below, slow and indifferent. Elijah hadn't spoken more than a few words to another soul in over a decade. Folks in Marrow Creek had long since stopped asking why. They called him Ghost Rancher, not out of malice but in that peculiar way small towns name things they don't understand. His land was his world, silent, predictable, unchanging. The way he liked it. The way it had to be. The fire had taken his wife, Mara, 15 winters past. One candle tipped too far, one moment too slow. He'd made it out, barely. She hadn't. Since then, the house stood rebuilt, but hollow. Her rocking chair remained by the hearth, untouched. Her boots stayed by the door. Elijah kept them polished out of habit, not hope. In town, he was seen but never met. Children whispered rumors. Some said he spoke to spirits, others swore he never aged. When he came to buy salt, nails, or tobacco, conversation ended the moment he stepped inside. Elijah didn't mind. Silence was easier than false concern. So when the storm came, it felt like something unnatural was being shaken loose from the world. The sky cracked with light, rain fell like stones, and the wind cried through the ridges as if the land was in mourning. That's when he saw her. Near the eastern edge of his property, beneath a huddle of twisted juniper, a figure crouched low. The shape didn't belong to deer or coyote. It was human, small, unmoving. He dismounted slowly, boots sinking into soaked earth, hand resting instinctively on the butt of his revolver. As he drew closer, the figure rose, defiant, alert. A girl, maybe 18, no more. Apache by her cheekbones, her braid, the wariness in her stance. Her dress was torn, soaked through, and streaked with dried blood not her own. Her arms were cross-tight, but her eyes stared straight into his like she'd already decided she wouldn't beg. He didn't ask what she was running from. Didn't ask her name. Elijah just nodded once, slow and sure, and tilted his head toward the barn. She hesitated, then followed. In silence. Inside, he lit the old stove and laid out a dry blanket on the straw. She didn't thank him. Just curled in the corner, back to the wall, and watched him like he was a caged animal. He brought her a cup of black coffee and left her alone. The next morning, she was still there. She worked without being asked. Repaired the broken gate that had been loose for months. Tended to a calf with a twisted leg. Quietly moved about the ranch like she knew how to be invisible. He caught her humming once, soft and mournful, while washing her hands in the trough. But when she saw him watching, she stopped. Days passed like smoke drifting. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. He brought her a pair of his wife's old boots one evening, left them outside the barn door. In the morning, they were gone. In town, the whispers started quickly. You hear he's got a squaw holed up out there? Bet she's one of those raider girls from the border tribes. She'll slit his throat and steal his land soon enough. Elijah said nothing. Let the rumors bloom and die. He didn't owe Marrow Creek an explanation. Not anymore. But even he wasn't immune to doubt. One night, as he stood in the doorway watching lightning twitch across the mountains, he heard movement behind him. She stood there, holding the polished boots, his wife's boots, mended, oiled, renewed. I hope you don't mind, she said, voice hoarse from disuse. It felt wrong, leaving them cracked. He stared at her a long time before answering. She'd have liked that. That was the first real exchange they'd had. The next day, she told him her name. Nita. Nothing more. He didn't ask what happened to her family, or why her left arm bore a scar shaped like a brand, or why she flinched when a hawk cried overhead. She didn't ask why he never smiled, or why he sometimes stared at the empty chair on the porch like someone was still sitting there. They both knew some stories didn't need telling to be understood. Their rhythm settled like dust in a beam of light. Elijah would bring her apples from the orchard she hadn't yet discovered. Nita would leave feathers on the porch rail, gifts of color and silence. They shared meals, never quite sitting across from one another, but always within reach. He repaired the barn roof while she carved shapes into old fence posts, snakes, owls, crescents of the moon. Still, Marrow Creek buzzed. Deputy Rosser eyed him hard at the general store. "You're makin' folks nervous, Braddock," he muttered. "Harborin' trouble's the same as stirrin' it." Elijah said nothing, just paid for his supplies and walked out. He was beginning to forget how to be angry, but not how to protect. That evening, Nita stood by the fence, watching the sun drop. Her silhouette cut sharp against the amber sky, braid trailing down her back like a line of shadow. She didn't turn when he approached. "You planning on stayin'?" he asked. Her voice was steady, unflinching. "Are you planning on asking me to leave?" He considered that. The question. The girl. The porch behind him, where her silence had started to feel like company. "No," he said. "I ain't." She nodded once, nothing more. As night fell, they stood side by side, not touching, not needing to. Just breathing in rhythm, two ghosts finding form again in each other's presence. And though Elijah didn't know what came next, for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid to find out. By spring, the valley had greened again, and the silence between Elijah and Nita had changed its nature. It was no longer a barrier, but a language. The way she refilled the water trough before he asked, the way he set a second plate at dinner without a word, these were gestures that meant something now. They still spoke little, but the pauses between words no longer felt like walls. They were spaces where trust was slowly taking root. Every morning, she walked the boundary of the ranch barefoot, eyes sharp, ears alert. She'd taken to hanging small tokens, woven twine, carved bone, feathers tied with sinew, on the fence posts, one every 100 yards. Elijah asked once what they meant. "Markers," she replied, crouched in the dirt, tying a feather to a branch. "For spirits. For me. For the land." He said nothing, only nodded. Somehow, it made sense. She didn't ask why he sometimes lingered at his wife's rocking chair. He didn't ask about the burn scars that wrapped her left forearm like smoke frozen in skin. There was an agreement between them, not silence out of secrecy, but out of reverence. Some wounds shouldn't be forced open just to prove they exist. But peace, Elijah knew, was always temporary in places like Marrow Creek. One morning, as he rode into town for feed and wire, he found the air heavy with unrest. People didn't just glance his way anymore, they stared. Hard. Sheriff Holcomb avoided his eyes, and even the barkeep, who usually offered a nod, turned his back. Then Rosser approached. The deputy rode a tall, black horse like he thought himself born to legend. His badge gleamed brighter than his sense, and his voice carried just a little louder than needed. "You hear about the rancher up north? Livestock gone. Tracks Leodin toward Apache land." Elijah's mouth was dry. He grunted, lifting a sack of oats onto the wagon. "Funny thing," Rosser continued, circling like a wolf pretending not to be hungry. "Some folks say they seen someone fit your girl's look, real close to the border. Armed." Elijah didn't flinch, didn't answer. But a knot formed in his gut like coiled barbed wire. He recognized the sound of a hunt starting. Not for justice, for blood. That night, she was gone. No goodbye. No note. Just her presence suddenly missing, like a breath held too long and lost. He checked the barn, the fence, the eastern ridge. Nothing. The only sign she had been there at all was the line of carved birds along the porch rail. 10 of them, wings outstretched. He knew without thinking that the next one was meant for tomorrow. He saddled his mare before the sun broke the horizon. Rode hard across dry washes and thorned canyons. It was near the edge of the old mining flats that he saw her, standing alone beneath the jagged sky. She wore the same boots he'd given her, dusted now with red earth. Her face was calm, but her hands were balled into fists. "I wasn't followed," she said before he could speak. "I didn't ask," he replied. She turned her face to the wind, not quite looking at him. "They'll come for me. You know that." He dismounted. His boots crunched the brittle grass as he stepped toward her. "I know. They'll blame me for what I didn't do. For what I didn't even see. Because I don't belong here." "You belong where you're safe," Elijah said softly. "No such place." He looked at her, really looked. At the girl who'd come out of a storm and into his life like flints sparking against steel. At the strength that wasn't loud but steady. Her fear was real, but she stood her ground. Always had. "I ain't lettin' them take you," he said, and his voice had weight. "Not for who you are. Not for their hate." Her breath hitched, and he noticed her eyes glisten, not from weakness but from release. Then he did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the silver ring that had never left his finger, his wife's ring, and set it in the dirt between them. She stared at it, then at him. "I ain't tryin' to replace what I lost," he said. "But I'm done livin' like it's all gone." She didn't answer. But she stepped forward, picked up the ring, and closed her fingers around it. Then, with quiet finality, she slipped it into her pouch. They rode back together, two shadows crossing land older than judgment. By dusk, Marrow Creek stirred. Rosser arrived just past nightfall with 2 riders behind him and a paper in hand. "Warrant," he said, loud for anyone within earshot. "For the apprehension of a known thief and suspected tribal insurgent." Elijah met him on the porch. No gun in his hands. No fear in his face. "You want her, deputy," he said, voice firm. "You'll need to walk past me." Rosser smirked. "You protectin' her now?" "I'm protectin' what's right." "Even if she's guilty? Even if she ain't yours to judge?" Rosser dismounted, heavy boots stirring dust, but he paused when the front door opened and Nita stepped out. She wore her braids tight and her chin high. No apology in her eyes. Just readiness. She didn't hide. She didn't run. She stood beside Elijah like she had all along. The townsfolk watched. Some from porches, others from behind curtains. And something passed between them all, not understanding, not yet, but a hesitation. A reckoning with the fact that the man they thought was buried in grief was standing taller than they'd ever seen. Rosser folded the paper. "This ain't over." "No," Elijah said, "but this part is." They left without a fight. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. Elijah added a second chair to the porch. Nita resumed carving birds. By the end of the week, there were 15. The last one, a hawk, had wings so wide it seemed ready to lift the whole rail. Some evenings, the children of Marrow Creek wandered out, bringing baskets of vegetables or folded cloth. No explanations. No apologies. Just small offerings of peace. Nita always accepted them with a nod. Never more. And at night, when the wind rose and carried the scent of cedar and ash across the land, Elijah would sometimes speak aloud, about cattle or stars or the past. Nita would listen. Sometimes she answered. Sometimes she just stayed, and that was enough. Elijah no longer felt like a ghost. And Nita no longer felt like she had to disappear. They had not healed everything. But they had chosen to remain.